Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to the golden halls and drafty crevices of Versailles, where velvet drapes billow, powdered wigs itch, and one overly curious monarch is about to make a royal miscalculation involving a chimney. Picture this: it's dawn, the palace is bathed in amber light, birds chirp somewhere near the orangery, and in the east wing of the chateau, you wake up beneath a mountain of embroidered linens, suffocating in your own luxury. Outside, Versailles hums like a distant beehive. You stretch beneath lavender-scented sheets, take one whiff of that fresh courtly morning air, and immediately regret it. Something smells off. A mixture of rose water, stale perfume, and something faintly roasted. Roasted what? Unclear. Your nose wrinkles. Must be Tuesday. You're not a noble, technically. You're more of an extremely unimportant page who's been granted the supreme honor of sleeping in a guest room near the royal study. Which means two things: 1, your mattress is slightly less filled with straw than usual, and 2, you are now subject to the whims of Louis XI's highly spontaneous schedule. You rise groggily, tug on your thick stockings, still damp from last night's storm, and shuffle to the grand window. The curtains are embroidered with so many fleurs-de-lis they might be sentient. The panes fog slightly as you lean against the chilly glass, gazing out across the endless gardens. But your peace is short-lived. Because beneath your feet, somewhere behind that gilded panel in the floor, is a faint, unmistakable whoosh of wind, a breeze from inside the palace walls. Now, a draft in Versailles is not unusual. It's practically tradition. The place is vast and riddled with architectural whims. But this one feels pointed. Strategic, even. It curls around your ankles like a cat with an agenda. You tiptoe across the room and press your palm to the fireplace. Cold. Odd. It shouldn't be. A few embers still glow faintly from last night's fire. But the wind is flowing into the hearth, not out. You duck down and peer upward into the flue. Darkness. You hear something shift. Or was that just soot settling? Then a voice, faint, indignant, and echoing down the chimney shaft. Je vous assure, this was supposed to be wider. You freeze. Did you just hear the king? Let's back up a bit. Louis XIII, King of France, son of Henry IV, wearer of elaborate collars and occasional fake mustaches, is not what you'd call chill. He's a man of strong opinions, extremely curly hair, and an inconvenient tendency to take matters into his own hands, often literally. And on this particular morning, Louis is irritated. The palace renovations are behind schedule. The new study fireplace, designed for maximum symmetrical grandeur, has been completed, but Louis suspects it's narrower than specified. His decorators insist it's perfect. His architects insist it's elegant. But the king? He wants proof. Now, you might expect a monarch to delegate this task. Send a mason. Ask a servant to climb in and test the draft. Commission a report, perhaps. But Louis? No. Louis is a man who once stopped a diplomatic meeting to personally adjust a tapestry. And so, before breakfast, he declares, "I shall examine the flue myself." Back in your room, you've now gathered your courage and your candle, and you're staring at the fireplace like it might explode. You whisper, "Your Majesty?" There's a grunt. Then, is that Jacques? Fetch someone with arms like ham. I'm wedged. You are not Jacques. You are absolutely not strong. And yet, your day now has a mission. A very confusing mission involving chimney logistics, monarchy, and soot. You bolt into the corridor. It smells of beeswax, orange peels, and nobles who bathed last Thursday. Around the corner, you nearly crash into a group of courtiers holding pastries and fanning themselves aggressively. You interrupt their gossip about the Queen's new shoes to ask, very carefully, if they've seen the king recently. They scoff. Obviously, one says, "He's in the study." You nod, trying not to sound completely unhinged. Inside the chimney, there's silence. Then one of them drops their almond tart. Cut to chaos. Within minutes, half the east wing is in discreet disarray. Nobody is running. Running is inelegant, but many are speedwalking with purpose. Whispers slither through velvet halls. A footman is dispatched. The royal architect is summoned from his bath. Someone from the kitchens brings butter, just in case. You return to your room, sit by the hearth, and listen to the occasional plunk from above. The king is humming now. La Marseillaise. Out of tune. The absurdity of it makes you laugh softly. You try to picture what Louis looks like up there, probably halfway up the flue, arms pinned, face sooty, pride completely intact. Historians still argue whether this was a moment of genuine curiosity or sheer royal boredom. One scholar, writing much later, called it a metaphoric descent into the belly of the state. Another just wrote, Louis. Why? Regardless, there's no turning back now. The king is in the chimney is too narrow, and Versailles is about to have a very strange morning. By mid-morning, half a dozen people have verified the situation. The king's lower half is visible from the fireplace in the upper study. His upper half is, tragically, somewhere in the flue wedged like a cork. Servants have brought pillows to cushion the hearthstone. A court artist has started sketching the scene. It is, after all, a moment for history. One fact: fireplaces in 17th century France were built more for looks than function. They smoked constantly. Flues were rarely cleaned. And some were capped with iron cowls that could trap birds and apparently monarchs. A lesser-known tidbit? The Versailles fireplaces were rumored to connect through an elaborate vertical network, part of a failed heating scheme involving hot bricks and confused ducts. Louis may have thought he could climb from one room to another through the chimneys. Why? Scholars disagree. Meanwhile, you've been recruited to run messages between floors. Which means you now have the privilege of observing the king's feet, very shiny boots, and passing along updates like, he says he's fine, but itchy. He requests plum jam and a small mirror. He's threatening to knight the next person who gets soot on his doublet. At one point, you're handed a ladder and told to poke gently. You decline. By evening, the palace has entered its weirdest kind of panic, silent, dignified, utterly ridiculous. Servants pretend they don't hear the muffled royal complaints. Musicians have been asked to play soft madrigals to soothe the chimney. The queen, God bless her, is in another wing pretending she doesn't know what's happening. And the draft? Still flowing. Still chilling your ankles. Still whispering that this day is only going to get weirder. You're sitting on a velvet-upholstered stool meant for displaying fruit, listening to the muffled sounds of your monarch grumbling through bricks, when the royal steward bursts in like a man who has just remembered he left a duck in the oven. The king, he announces to no one in particular, has requested a ruler. Everyone freezes. A ruler? Not a new one, he doesn't want to be replaced, thankfully, but a measuring stick. You blink. Is he planning renovations? You ask cautiously. The steward stares at you like you just insulted the Sun King, which, technically, hasn't been born yet. His Majesty wishes to confirm whether the dimensions of the flue meet the schematics he approved last April. Of course. He's taking measurements from inside the chimney. Now you're really in the thick of it. You are summoned again, this time to the eastern study. The smell of scorched rosemary fills the room. Somebody threw herbs on the fire, hoping it would please the trapped king. A cushion has been propped beneath the hearth in case of spontaneous royal descent. Above it, a servant is whispering reassuring nothings into the flue. I see a shoe, he murmurs. A distant royal voice replies, that's my shoe, imbecile. The crowd parts as you approach with the requested ruler. A long strip of polished oak, marked carefully in inches and royal thumbs, a bizarre measurement used for precisely nothing practical. You kneel and pass it up into the fireplace. There's a bit of a struggle, followed by a metallic clang and a sneeze. Too narrow by at least ACHOO 2 royal thumbs, comes the declaration. Courtiers nod solemnly, as if this was ever a debate. You're beginning to suspect that Louis XIII isn't entirely displeased with his current predicament. Certainly, it's a power move. Who else could command an entire palace's attention while wedged in a chimney? But it's more than that. It's the curiosity. Louis, for all his aloofness, was notorious for taking odd personal interest in palace details. Whether it was tapestry patterns or furniture varnish, he had a compulsion for knowing things firsthand. You remember the tapestry incident of last year. He stopped a diplomatic meeting mid-anecdote from a visiting Dutch ambassador to examine a suspicious goose stitched into the background. He declared it anatomically implausible and ordered the entire wall redone. So, a chimney? Really, this was inevitable. Still, there's a tension in the room now. While the king may be enjoying himself in a soot-streaked sort of way, everyone else is aware that time is passing. And a monarch stuck in a chimney is a monarch not issuing decrees, not inspecting gardens, and not participating in the elaborate daily ballet that is Versailles etiquette. Also, he hasn't eaten since breakfast, and no one dares suggest snacks. As the day ages into golden afternoon, the drama intensifies. 2 guards arrive bearing an ornate, 3-foot-long pair of fireplace tongs, presumably to assist, though in what way is unclear. The king's personal physician shows up with a stethoscope made of silver and mahogany. He crouches at the hearth, listens for a moment, and declares his pulse sounds imperious. Which is both vague and oddly comforting. A lesser-known tidbit, Louis XIII had a documented fascination with internal palace airflow. He once commissioned a team of engineers to chart how wind moved through his bedchambers, convinced there was a pattern. One theory? That drafts carried thoughts. Another? That his mother's perfume was hiding in the baseboards. You recall the infamous whistling panel affair, in which Louis was convinced a secret admirer was trying to court him through wall vents. It turned out to be a bat. So the chimney excursion, well, it fits a pattern. Around mid-afternoon, as sunbeams slide across the parquet floor and courtiers pretend to read letters while definitely eavesdropping, the king makes a surprising announcement. I believe I see light. A cheer rises, brief, hopeful, maybe exaggerated. Then, wait. No. That's just a bit of soot in my eye. Another servant faints. Now a serious discussion begins. How long can one remain wedged in a chimney before dignity, nutrition, or circulation becomes a problem? The Queen's confessor suggests divine assistance. Perhaps a cleansing fire, he murmurs ominously, until someone reminds him the king is in the chimney. Others propose a pulley system. Someone else suggests butter. You're pulled into a huddle in the corner with the steward, a kitchen boy, and a man who may or may not be the palace barber. So far, the steward whispers, we've tried whispering encouragement, humming, and reverse psychology. You blink. Reverse psychology? We told him the chimney probably wouldn't let someone so majestic escape. That seemed to agitate him. You sigh. And what about using a ladder? Too vertical, the kitchen boy shrugs. You stare blankly at him. Back at the fireplace, the king is musing aloud. I wonder, he says dreamily, how many birds have gotten stuck up here. Pity. At least they had wings. This is the 3rd bird reference in an hour. You begin to suspect soot is affecting His Majesty's mental clarity. A court musician begins softly strumming a lute near the base of the hearth, improvising a ballad with the unfortunate working title, My Liege, the Chimney Dove. It is not well received. And yet, somehow, this is becoming the new normal. Life continues. A pigeon flutters past the window. Someone starts boiling potatoes. The king requests that the lute player modulate into a more minor key. You, meanwhile, are beginning to understand why the architect who designed this wing allegedly retired early and took up beekeeping. Historians still argue whether this particular chimney was ever intended to function. Some claim it was decorative, built solely for symmetry on the east-facing wall. Others insist it was designed to vent multiple rooms, but the flue size was reduced to make space for an experimental dumbwaiter system that never worked. One theory suggests the fireplace was a decoy, meant to distract visiting dignitaries from a hidden passage nearby. Another historian, writing long after Louis XII's reign, claimed the chimney wasn't even listed in the original blueprints, but that it appears in later documents with the ominous phrase, flue of uncertain temperament. You suspect that phrase could be applied to most of Versailles. As late afternoon begins to slide toward early evening, a hush falls over the eastern wing. The king has stopped grumbling. Someone fears he's fainted. A glass of diluted wine is passed up, which he accepts with a regal, soot-covered hand. "I require brie," he mutters. The palace has 6 kinds. None are soot-compatible. You're told to fetch something chewy but not flaky. You bring back a fig. He refuses it. Everyone begins to understand that this might go on well into the night. At this point, the sun has all but melted into the tree line, casting Versailles in a warm, syrupy glow that would be quite romantic if your monarch weren't lodged in a chimney like a slightly regal cork. The palace flickers with lamplight, and somewhere in the distance, a harpsichord plays something mournful, as though the entire court is gently preparing itself for a vigil. You're sitting cross-legged on a brocade cushion near the hearth, nursing a lukewarm goblet of cider. Your job? Occasionally shout soothing updates into the flue, like, "They're drawing up some exciting new pulley diagrams, Your Majesty." Or, "They've located the goat fat soap." Yes. Goat fat soap. Someone sent a page to the kitchens with strict instructions: find something slick but sacred. This, apparently, was the solution. The soap arrives on a silver tray, wrapped in silk and smelling vaguely of disappointment and elderberries. The bishop blesses it before it's handed to the royal carpenter. Speaking of which, enter Bertrand, master of joinery, purveyor of squeaky doors, and the only man in Versailles with the audacity to tap on the royal boot and say, "Your Majesty, I brought a spatula." Bertrand, a stout, square-jawed man with impressive sideburns and a passion for pulleys, examines the situation. He doesn't flinch. Doesn't snicker. Simply wipes his hands on a linen cloth and says, "Right then. We'll need 2 ropes, a leather sling, 3 men with shoulders like barrels, and absolute silence." Which is the first time anyone has asked for silence at Versailles all day. He begins his inspection. Bertrand sticks his head halfway into the fireplace, whistles thoughtfully, then pulls out a small wooden compass and starts mapping the internal flue angles in soot. You watch him, impressed and deeply confused. "What are you doing?" You whisper. "Calculating his exit vector," he says. "Exit vector?" Bertrand just nods like that explains everything. You return to your cushion as the pulley team begins setting up. Ropes are secured to an upper beam. A soft leather sling, likely repurposed from a baby cradle, has been threaded carefully beneath His Majesty's royal thighs. "Do not tug until I say so," Bertrand commands. "Do not allow soot to contact the royal hem," adds a steward. "Do not, under any circumstances, mention the phrase Santa Claus within earshot." The bishop interjects. You almost choke on your cider. Time slows. A long, thick rope snakes its way through a hole in the study ceiling. Bertrand positions his men. Everyone else stands stock-still, eyes wide, hearts thudding. Even the Queen's parrot has gone silent. A tug. A creak. Nothing. Bertrand motions again, this time more firmly. The rope groans, like it remembers better days. A faint scraping echoes from inside the flue. Then a sudden, unmistakable yelp. Not so fast. The rope slackens instantly. The room exhales. Now comes the great compromise, micro-adjustments. 2 tugs, then a wiggle, says Bertrand. A wiggle. Yes, he clarifies. A downward shimmy followed by a gentle twist to the left. His Majesty is caught on a ridge near the clavicle. You blink. How do you know that? He winks. I've removed nobles from stranger places. And nobody dares ask what that means. Another attempt. This time, there's motion. Slight, like watching a tree lean in the wind. The boot shifts. The soot stirs. A few flakes drift down like royal dandruff. Someone begins humming nervously. And then, pop. A definitive, squeaky sort of pop. Like a cork being eased out of a reluctant bottle. There's a cheer, but too soon. Because the king doesn't slide out. He settles. half an inch lower. Slightly angled. Bertrand steps back and mutters, "We're going to need the butter." The butter is unsalted, infused with herbs, and presumably blessed by a dozen clergy. It arrives in an ornate bowl shaped like a cherub's face. One servant kneels and begins applying it with a pastry brush. You suppress a giggle. This is the King of France. Being buttered. Very delicately. A fringe fact, mostly whispered, Versailles kitchens went through over 30 pounds of butter a day. Mostly for pastries. Occasionally, as it turns out, for royal extraction. Historians still argue whether this particular buttering actually happened, or if it was exaggerated later in court gossip. Some say it was olive oil. Others claim the butter was replaced midway through with sweet lard because someone preferred the aroma. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Meanwhile, the king has begun a philosophical monologue. Do you suppose, he muses through soot-choked wheezes, that chimneys are mankind's attempt to tame smoke? To give chaos a spine? Everyone freezes. A court scribe begins scribbling. Write that down, someone whispers. And so it is, give chaos a spine becomes an unofficial motto among the footmen. You hear it muttered while they clean boots for weeks afterward. Back to the chimney. One more pull. Bertrand instructs the rope crew with the solemnity of a cathedral bell ringer. 3-count rhythm. Flex on the drop. Remember the left twist. And someone fetch more fig jam. Jam, you ask. For morale, Bertrand replies. Sure. The room falls into formation again. Muscles flex. Jaws clench. And then, at last, a final tug. And a definite shift. Dust falls in a miniature avalanche. The boots disappear. You hear something shuffle above. Then, faintly. I believe I've found the study's secret flue chamber. A pause. I am now sitting in soot, but victorious. Bertrand salutes the fireplace like it just won a duel. But of course, His Majesty isn't out yet. He's just mobile. There's still the small matter of how to descend without damaging a ruffle or scuffing a buckle. Suggestions include: a basket on a rope, denied. Building scaffolding, too noisy. Convincing the king to jump onto a feather mattress requires 3 feather mattresses, a blessing, and an insurance waiver. Eventually, it's decided that the best course of action is the simplest: lower him down, slowly, by hand. And so begins the descent. You help guide the ropes. You hear Louis mutter something about rebirth through soot. Someone plays a single solemn note on the harpsichord. The bishop makes a cryptic gesture involving rosemary. And then, out he comes. Covered in ash, cheeks smudged, cape slightly torn, but standing. Regal. Slightly cross-eyed from the smoke. But, crucially, free. You and a dozen others drop to one knee. He waves it off. I am fine, he says. Then coughs violently. Then, very seriously, I require a bath. And a sandwich. Everyone springs into motion. The steward rushes off to prepare the marble tub. A footman fetches the gooseberry preserves. Bertrand disappears, muttering something about ceiling beams and never getting paid enough for royal extractions. You remain still, processing what just happened. Somewhere in the flue above, a lone pigeon coos, confused and mildly soot-streaked. You imagine it will become legend in its own flock. And down here, among the tapestries and the perfumed panic, you sense the beginning of a new story taking root. One that will be whispered down corridors, embroidered, incorrectly, into tapestries, and sung badly by lute players for years to come. The day the king got stuck in a chimney. The palace is humming again, not with the usual measured elegance of court life, but with something far more electric: gossip. Versailles, for all its pomp, has never truly been silent, and tonight it rustles like a silken beehive. Word of the royal chimney incident has spread, despite everyone being very solemnly and thoroughly sworn to secrecy. You suspect the oath included something about eternal silence or assignment to latrine duty, but unfortunately for the stewards, it's hard to keep a story this odd locked up when the king himself emerged looking like a chimney sweep who inherited a crown. You shuffle through the west corridor en route to the linen chamber, where you've been dispatched to fetch postsuit garments. As you pass the servants' quarters, you catch snippets. Said he was reciting poetry in there. I heard he summoned a pigeon and named it Pierre. Apparently he mistook a soot stain for the ghost of his grandfather. You don't even stop walking anymore. The rumors are multiplying like mice in a bakery. At the royal baths, Louis XIII is being gently dunked into a tub infused with eucalyptus, wine herbs, and what appears to be slices of cucumber. His bath steward, Francois, whose official title is Gentleman of the Basin, is scrubbing soot off the king's earlobe with a goosefeather brush. Very delicately. You stand near the door holding freshly warmed hose and a silk doublet, trying not to make eye contact. Louis lifts one eyelid. What's your name again? You blink. Still Julian, Your Majesty. He says, closing the lid again. You have a calming presence. You didn't faint. Thank you? He waves a soapy hand. We'll need to review those flu schematics again. Something's off. There is absolutely no scenario in which you, a glorified towel holder, will be asked to review architectural schematics with the King of France, but you nod anyway. A mainstream historical fact for you, Versailles had over 1,000 fireplaces at its peak. Most of them smoked terribly. It was widely acknowledged, even during construction, that the palace's grand scale and ornate facades came at the cost of proper ventilation. Builders compensated with elaborate chimneys, many of which were decorative and led absolutely nowhere. This particular study chimney, now forever famous, was one of the more ambiguous designs. It technically connected to an older heating system buried in the foundations, likely repurposed from a hunting lodge. But nobody expected it to be explored. Except Louis, of course. And now that he has, you imagine this wing will smell faintly of smoked monarch for years to come. Freshly bathed and wrapped in linen, the king is helped into a soft red robe. His hair is half-dried and standing on end like a startled hedgehog. He still looks regal. Just crispy. He dismisses the bath staff with a wave, then turns to you and says, "Fetch me the velvet slippers. The green ones. I've earned a soft landing." You sprint down the hall, retrieve them from the closet guarded by a footman with one eyebrow and no sense of humor, and return to find the king seated by the fire again. You hesitate. He notices. Don't worry, I've lost my taste for vertical spaces. He lifts one leg, inspects the singed edge of his robe, and mutters, "This is going to be an absolute nightmare for the royal portraitist." Meanwhile, in other corners of the palace, damage control has begun. The steward of narratives, a man named Adrian who always carries a feather quill tucked behind his ear, has convened a meeting with the court scribes, spin doctors, and one very nervous harpist. The goal? Turn this entire episode into something poetic, noble, and preferably divine. One proposed version, the king descended into the hearth as a symbolic pilgrimage of renewal, emerging wiser, sootier, and metaphorically cleansed. Another version claims he was investigating reports of fire spirits disrupting the ventilation. A third draft suggests he rescued a trapped falcon and was too humble to speak of it. All will likely be circulated in various salons by morning. You, however, are drafted for a much stranger errand. Accompanying a small group of officials down into the basement archives, where they hope to find the original chimney schematics. You are the eyewitness, they say. The chimney liaison. You didn't even know that was a job. The archives are musty and cold. Shelves groan under scrolls. Cobwebs hang like tinsel. The archivist, a stooped woman named Beatrice, greets you with a glare and a sneeze. "What are you looking for?" she says, already annoyed. "A flu diagram," says the steward. "Eastern study. Circa last year." She gestures vaguely to a collapsing shelf labeled miscellaneous ducts. You dig. You sneeze. You find things, one plan for a chimney that feeds directly into a closet, a drawing of what may be an indoor swamp, and a long-forgotten blueprint for a fireplace that was supposed to rotate. Eventually, you uncover a torn parchment titled Draft Routes in Thermal Mischief, East Wing. You blink. This might be it. Back upstairs, you deliver the scroll. Louis opens it eagerly, still wearing the green slippers, now sipping a glass of watered claret. His eyes scan the page. Ah, he says at last, tapping the corner. Here. The flue was designed to include an elbow curve. He turns to the room. That's what caught me. The elbow curve. Everyone nods, pretending this is all perfectly normal. But why is there an elbow, he asks, mostly to himself. A few heartbeats of silence. Then, to slow the flow of heat, perhaps, a steward offers. To trap the bad spirits, murmurs a chamberlain, more nervous than usual. To store seasonal cheeses, you think but wisely don't say aloud. The king leans back. I shall have it sealed. Symbolically. Let it stand as a warning. And also, perhaps install a window. Historians still argue whether the elbow flue curve was an intentional design feature or a last-minute fix for an awkward roof beam. Some speculate it was meant to act as a pressure buffer, others believe it was simply mismeasured. There's even one wild theory that it was a secret signaling channel for chimney sweeps in training. But no one can prove it. You're more inclined to believe it was what so many things at Versailles were: beautiful, illogical, and just a little bit haunted. Night has fallen. Candles flicker in golden sconces. Outside, the fountains go quiet. And inside the royal study, the king dozes in a high-backed chair, snoring softly, still wrapped in his bathrobe, feet resting on a plush footstool embroidered with tiny lions. You are dismissed, finally. As you tiptoe from the room, you glance back once, just to be sure he isn't eyeing the hearth again. He isn't. But you do notice something odd. The flames in the fireplace flicker sideways for a moment, bending toward the flue. As if the chimney is breathing. Or watching. Or simply waiting for its next visitor. You return to your quarters sometime past midnight, thoroughly exhausted, still faintly smelling of lard, soot, and courtly panic. Your slippers squish slightly as you cross the corridor, thanks to a hasty spill of chimney soap earlier in the evening, and you're not entirely sure your own hair hasn't somehow acquired a layer of ash by osmosis. Behind you, the palace murmurs gently in its sleep. A harp plays 2 rooms over, not particularly well. Someone is snoring in a linen closet. Downstairs, a sleepy kitchen maid can be heard telling a pie not to be dramatic. But even with the hush settling in, you can still feel the ripple of what happened today curling through the marble corridors. The king got stuck in a chimney. And tomorrow, everyone will pretend it never happened. You toss yourself onto your mattress, which crunches slightly. Why does it always crunch? And gaze up at the ceiling. There's a fresco of some mythological bird staring disapprovingly down at you. Probably meant to symbolize vigilance or triumph or some other virtue that you did not personally embody today. Still. You were there. You passed the butter. You witnessed Bertrand calculating exit vectors. You saw the exact moment when the king emerged from soot-covered shadow, arms outstretched like a confused phoenix. What a day. You doze off briefly, only to be awakened by a knock at your door so soft it could have been a guilty moth. You groan and swing it open to reveal Emile, the trumpet boy, cradling his instrument like a newborn duck. I heard it from the goat, he says. You blink at him. What? The goat says it was Pierre, he whispers conspiratorially. The pigeon. The one who saw the king first. You rub your eyes. Emile, it's past midnight. Why are you here? I wrote a song, he says, holding out a folded parchment. It's called His Majesty Ascends, and Descends, the Flue of Truth. Of course it is. Later, you'll find out this is only the first of many creative tributes. By breakfast, someone will have penned an ode titled The Noble Soot, another servant will be caught drawing caricatures of Louis with a chimney hat, and at least one noblewoman will claim she saw the whole ordeal from a mirror blessed with clairvoyance. But for now, Emile leaves, humming his deeply inappropriate tune, and you flop back into bed, arms folded behind your head, staring once more at that judgmental ceiling bird. Dawn creeps in with soft blue light, and with it, a new kind of tension. The king has declared today a return to dignity. Which, translated from Versailles, means, no jokes. No chimney references. And under no circumstances is anyone allowed to mention soot in front of His Majesty. This rule is immediately broken by the pastry chef, who presents breakfast and says, "Your croissant, lightly dusted with sugar. Just sugar." The king narrows his eyes. The chef is reassigned to celery duty. You, miraculously, are summoned again. The steward explains it like this: His Majesty has requested a witness. A loyal observer. Someone with soot tolerance and a sense of balance. Balance, you ask? Yes, the steward says flatly. You'll be walking the roof. It turns out, the king wants to inspect the chimney from the outside now. Because of course he does. A crew of artisans, 2 architects, and a goat named Marguerite, don't ask, are already climbing the slate shingles by the time you arrive. The roof of Versailles is not a friendly place. It's steep, wind-slicked, and about as comfortable as a hedgehog wearing armor. Still, the view is spectacular. Gardens stretch endlessly in symmetrical majesty. The fountains glint in the sunlight. Birds wheel overhead. Somewhere down below, you're pretty sure someone is yelling at a tulip. Louis is already up there, seated on a collapsible chair that has no business being on a roof. He's holding a parasol, because obviously. "Ah, Julian," he says cheerily, "tell me, do you see a curve here? That one? Just near the base of that decorative gargoyle." You peer at the flue. It's squat, crooked, and capped with what looks like a rooster made of bronze. The elbow is definitely visible now, a slight bend just before it narrows to nothing. Very deceptive, the king mutters. Almost sinister. You nod. Historians will call it an accident, he continues. But I think it was sabotage. An act of architecture with opinions. You try very hard not to smile. A mainstream historical fact, Louis XIII was known for his interest in the sciences, particularly geometry, fortifications, and unusual devices. He once commissioned a clock that told time using shadows cast on a puddle. It didn't work. Some accounts suggest he frequently wandered the grounds in the early hours, adjusting trellises himself, or contemplating the strategic placement of hedges. In that light, his rooftop musings don't feel out of place. Just elevated. From your vantage point, you notice something odd, a small gap between 2 tiles, half hidden behind the flue structure. You mention it. The king perks up. A flaw in symmetry? We can't have that. He motions for the mason. But as they pry back the tiles carefully, so as not to startle the gargoyle, you spot something beneath them. Wooden boards. Not just roof supports. Something built. A hatch. Everyone leans in. The mason prods it. It creaks open, revealing a narrow shaft, dusty, lined with stone, and vanishing downward into darkness. The king peers inside. You hear him mutter, "A secret passage." I knew it. Historians still argue whether this moment truly happened. Some claim the hatch discovery was a later embellishment to add mystery. Others swear it was the beginning of Versailles' most elaborate hidden room system, one designed for servants to move unseen. But this shaft seems older. Cruder. Definitely not on the blueprints. Louis claps his hands. This, he declares, is why one must inspect one's chimneys personally. The rest of the court claps politely, though many are wondering silently whether they've just witnessed the start of another royal obsession. Because if there's one thing Versailles can't resist, it's mystery. And if there's one thing the king can't resist, it's proving everyone else wrong. Later that afternoon, you are summoned once more not to inspect, not to translate scrolls or butter masonry, but simply to sit beside the king as he dictates an official letter. To posterity, he says grandly. To warn them. You hold the parchment steady as he scrawls in his most ceremonial hand. On the architectural dangers of vertical curiosity. He pauses. Too much, he asks. No, sire, you reply. Just enough. By now, it's safe to say the palace has split into 2 secret camps, those who pretend the chimney incident never happened, and those who cannot stop whispering about it. You wake the next morning to find that the incident, now being called le petit confinement by the kitchen staff, has been immortalized on a decorative napkin. A napkin. Someone stitched a cartoon of the king's boots poking from a fireplace onto palace linens. You blink at it over breakfast, unsure whether to laugh or panic. The steward collects the offending embroidery with a pained expression and mutters something about imminent exile to Brittany. You quietly fold your own napkin into your pocket. Today's assignment seems, at first, less dangerous. You've been summoned to assist in the handling of atmosphere. No one explains what that means. You show up at the appointed hall only to find 3 footmen, a court musician, a pastry cart, and the minister of tongs. Yes. Him. He's a tall, slightly graying man in a very crisp coat with brass embroidery in the shape of, well, tongs. He looks perpetually suspicious of all furniture. His real name is Edouard, but no one uses it. He eyes you, then says, "Today we rehearse what would have happened had we needed to use the tongs." You nod. I see. You do not see. There's a dummy in the fireplace. Well, not a proper dummy. It's a coat rack wrapped in pillows, with shoes jammed on the ends and a small portrait of Louis XIII pinned to the top. The likeness is unflattering. The goal: simulate a chimney extraction using the royal tongs, should a future king ever get stuck. You can't make this up. The musician starts playing a slow waltz, for procedural elegance. The minister demonstrates tongue-gripping posture, makes a quarter turn, and then, without ceremony, plucks the dummy from the flue. The pillow head flops forward. The musician stops. Everyone claps politely. You're handed a clipboard and told to make notes on angle of removal, soot displacement, and general dignity. You write, pillow detached. Wig fell. Slightly undignified. A mainstream historical fact: many royal courts trained for emergencies. Fire drills. Poison response protocols. Even escape routes, though few were actually usable. But no records show any monarchy rehearsing chimney-based extractions. Until now. And yet, you can't help but admire the commitment. There's now an official tongs manual. It has a wax seal and everything. You skim it later while sipping lukewarm cider behind a curtain. Excerpt, page 3. In case of resistance, rotate clockwise, then apply goose grease. Page 5. If His Majesty makes sudden philosophical pronouncements, pause for notation. Page 7. Never yank. Only elevate with reverence. You're still chuckling at that when a small commotion draws your attention. 2 servants burst into the hall, breathless, both talking over each other. Pierre's missing again. Last seen fluttering into the flue. Holding something shiny in its beak. The pigeon. The soot-coated pigeon, now apparently named Pierre, is back. Or rather, gone again. Vanished into the same flue Louis descended. No one wants to say it aloud, but the thought hangs in the air. What if it wasn't just a chimney? What if it's connected? By mid-afternoon, you're outside with a shovel and a map of dubious accuracy. The king, naturally, has ordered an exploratory garden dig. The theory: there's a hidden shaft that links multiple chimneys to an underground corridor, perhaps even the ruins of the old hunting lodge Versailles was built on top of. You dig near a laurel bush and uncover 3 worms. A broken shoe buckle. Something that might be a teacup, or a very frightened snail. Meanwhile, the court librarian reads aloud from dusty building ledgers. Here, she says, pointing. A note from 1613, one flue to be built wider than usual, per request of visiting monks. Monks? Historians still argue whether monks ever visited the pre-palace hunting lodge, or whether this was a euphemism for someone else. The ledger offers no further clues. It also contains a doodle of a chicken. So, that's helpful. The king soon joins the dig, not to help, of course, but to supervise. He wears a wide hat, a cane, and a velvet cloak with more embroidery than your entire wardrobe. Progress, he asks, swirling wine in a goblet shaped like a unicorn. You present the teacup snail with pride. He squints. We're close. I can feel it. Can he? Or does he just really want to believe this flue leads somewhere significant? Either way, you're all committed now. Late afternoon brings new information. The Queen's falconer claims he once saw a pigeon vanish near the kitchens and reappear near the stables without flying. He suspects a pigeon tunnel. You are sent to investigate. Behind the spice pantry, beneath a shelf of coriander jars, you find it, a narrow, crumbling duct sealed behind a grate. It smells faintly of pepper and regret. Inside, you spot a feather. Not just any feather. A small one, with a red silk thread tied around it. Pierre? Or some ancient secret? You report your findings to the king, who is now seated beside a garden fountain, sketching chimney designs in the dirt with his cane. He hears you out, then proclaims, "Tomorrow, we send someone in." You swallow. Into the pigeon tunnel? Precisely, he says. If Pierre can do it, so can a Frenchman. That night, as you're cleaning soot from your cuffs for what feels like the 100th time, you hear a voice behind you. It's not just a chimney anymore, is it? You turn. It's Bertrand, the carpenter, arms folded, face grim. There's something old, he says. Something that shouldn't be breathing still. You blink. You mean the chimney's alive? He shrugs. I mean it remembers. Stone doesn't forget when kings crawl through it. You don't sleep well after that. The next morning begins, as most days in Versailles do, with the smell of baked fruit and rising dread. You sit at a long breakfast table beneath a chandelier so ornate it could double as a small ship. Your fellow junior staffers munch quietly on buttered rolls, glancing around as if expecting someone to burst in and declare an emergency. You wouldn't be surprised. Especially after last night's official decree from the king, an expedition shall be sent into the flue passage. For knowledge. And for pigeons. He has not rescinded it. He has, however, added a footnote, preferably someone agile. Curious. Modestly brave. All eyes slowly turn to you. You are now what the palace is referring to unironically as the designated tunnel observer. A title that inspires precisely zero confidence. The mission is simple. In theory, you will enter the narrow tunnel behind the spice pantry. You will proceed as far as is safe. You will document everything with charcoal and parchment. If you see a pigeon, you are to make eye contact, but not approach. If you hear a whisper, you are to remain calm. If you see a shadow shaped like a monk, well, that's just bad luck. You are also given a candle, a tiny vial of lavender oil for the nerves, a length of string so you can find your way back, and a very small flag with the royal emblem for morale. Bertrand, who is taken to muttering things like "not all passages should be passed," ties the string around your waist with theatrical solemnity. The Queen's parrot watches from a perch nearby, squawking, "He's doomed. He's doomed. You're beginning to regret everything." Down you go. The tunnel behind the pantry is narrower than you expected, and it smells like burnt cinnamon and old secrets. The floor is stone, slick with years of neglect. Your candle flickers nervously in the stale air. You duck beneath a beam, nearly trip over a pipe, and hear something skitter away in the darkness. Possibly a rat. Possibly something more poetic. Like the ghost of a rat. You count your breaths. 1, 2, 3. Focus. 10 paces in, you find the first marking, a soot stain shaped vaguely like a rooster. You're not sure whether it's natural or intentional, but it gives you pause. A mainstream historical fact, many old structures included secret servant passages, often hidden in walls or beneath staircases. But few were mapped clearly. Versailles, with its endless expansions and improvisations, is infamous for its labyrinth of hidden routes. One legend even speaks of a chimney that connects to the Queen's dressing room via a series of accidental alcoves. But this passage feels older. Rougher. It wasn't meant for elegance. It was meant for movement. Silent movement. You press on. At 12 paces, the tunnel forks. One path leads slightly downward, toward a gust of cool air. The other narrows to something almost crawl-worthy. You mark the wall with a bit of charcoal and choose the left path. It opens into a small chamber, barely larger than a cupboard. Inside, you find a rusted spoon, a wooden dice, and, curiously, a pigeon feather wedged into the corner, tied with red thread. Pierre's path, no doubt. But why is it tied? You remember the rumors that the king believes pigeons can carry secrets. That the royal aviary once trained them to deliver coded messages via embroidery floss. It sounds ridiculous. Except, here you are. You pocket the dice. For luck. And that's when you hear it. A gentle sound. Not footsteps, exactly. Not breathing. Something, shuffling. You freeze. Candle trembling. Hand on the wall. Mind racing. Could just be the wind, you think. Just the way air moves through stone. Then, a whisper. J.E. voice. You turn. Nothing. But the air has changed. Thickened. As though someone else is exhaling nearby. You back up. Slowly. Foot by foot, retracing your string line, heart thudding like a misbehaving drum. Back to the fork. Back past the rooster soot. Back beneath the pantry. Bursting out into the kitchen, pale and breathless. You collapse onto a flour sack. The queen's parrot sees you and cackles. He saw. He saw. You are very seriously considering a different career. Later, as you recount your findings to a gathered audience, including the king, still in his green slippers, you omit the whisper. Mostly. You mention the chamber, the feather, the dice. But you say nothing about the voice. Louis strokes his chin. Dice? Yes, sire. Perhaps an old game den, he muses. For monks. Or criminals. Or monk criminals. The queen raises an eyebrow from her embroidery. The king is now convinced the chimney network leads to a long-forgotten chamber de complot, a room used by former inhabitants for plotting, whispering, and possibly card games. He immediately calls for a deeper expedition. You suggest waiting. He doesn't hear you. Because Pierre has returned. The pigeon flutters through the open window, lands on the windowsill, and very deliberately drops something shiny onto the king's plate. It's a button. An ornate, soot-stained button. One that very clearly belonged to Louis XII's ceremonial robe. The one he was wearing the day he got stuck. Everyone gasps. The pigeon bows. You nearly faint. The king leans forward. Smiles faintly. And whispers, so he really was watching. Historians still argue whether Pierre was a trained spy, a bored bird, or simply in the right chimney at the right time. Some say the red thread was part of a forgotten court ritual. Others believe it was meant to bind a secret, a feather tied in trust. But here in Versailles, where walls have ears and flues have plans, anything seems possible. Especially when the pigeons are watching. At this point, the pigeon has become a palace celebrity. Pierre, no longer just a soot-dappled wanderer, is now known as Le Témoin Volant, the flying witness. He receives grapes on silver dishes, is granted access to the Queen's solarium unaccompanied, and has been painted twice, perched atop the royal scepter. You, however, are no closer to understanding what actually happened in that tunnel. Because while everyone around you is spinning grand tales of ancient secret societies and pigeon-based espionage, you're still haunted by that voice. The whisper that slithered through the dark, J.E. voice. I see. You're not sure who it was or what it was, but something else lives beneath Versailles. And today, unfortunately, you're going back. Your second descent into the tunnel is less glamorous. No small flag. No lavender vial. Just you, a thicker candle, a sharp stick, for morale, and Bertrand. The carpenter walks behind you, carrying a bag full of tools and muttering to himself about stone that doesn't breathe right. He also brings cheese. For energy. Cheese, he explains, is how I negotiate with fear. You decide not to argue. This time, you take the other fork. The one that veers sharply downward. The tunnel twists like an eel, dipping through ancient stone. The walls sweat. The air is damp and oddly metallic. And every few steps, you pass some strange detail. A nail hammered into stone at waist height. A rusted hook hanging from the ceiling. A symbol carved into the wall that looks suspiciously like a squirrel. You pause to sketch it. Why a squirrel? Old masons used symbols instead of names, Bertrand whispers. Squirrels were popular. You make a mental note to never underestimate masonry humor. At 20 paces, the passage opens, barely, into a new chamber. This one is taller, dome-like, and filled with a low fog that smells faintly of lemon wax and burnt wool. You raise your candle. There, at the far end, half buried in dust and pigeon droppings, is a wooden sign. You brush it off and read the faded letters. Salle d'odeurs, the room of smells. Bertrand nods gravely. I've heard of this. You blink. You have? He squats beside a broken urn and pokes it with a stick. The early architects believed the palace absorbed too many human aromas. This chamber was supposed to redirect them. A smell trap? Essentially. A fringe tidbit, Versailles had chronic odor issues. Despite its beauty, the palace suffered from inadequate plumbing, poorly ventilated chambers, and thousands of perfumed bodies marinating in summer heat. Some sections reportedly had entire scent diversion systems. Whether or not they worked is still debated. This room, apparently, was one of them. You wander its edges. Someone had once built pipes along the walls, meant to carry scent upward or downward. A kind of olfactory funnel. In one corner, you find a rack of tiny bottles. Most are empty. One still holds a yellowish paste. Bertrand sniffs it and recoils. Old cologne, he croaks. Or soup. Hard to say. Then you spot something stranger. A piece of folded parchment, wedged into the mouth of a pipe. You pry it loose. It's brittle, stained, and sealed with wax, barely. Breaking it open, you reveal poetry. Bad poetry. But poetry nonetheless. To the pigeon who knows. Where the chimney wind blows. It's signed with a symbol. Not a name. Not even a squirrel. A stylized eye. Watching. Winking. You feel that cold draft again. The same one from your bedroom days ago. The next few hours are a blur of discovery. You and Bertrand uncover a second tunnel, partially collapsed. A cache of tiny scrolls, written in multiple hands. And a single blue ribbon, burned at one end, tied around the leg bone of what might once have been a raven. You take notes. Bertrand sketches. Neither of you speaks much. Because this isn't just an accident of architecture anymore. It's a secret. A living, breathing secret that stretches through the bones of the palace. One that's been hidden beneath the fluted columns and golden cornices for years, perhaps generations. And it may very well center on the chimney. Or what the chimney used to be. Historians still argue whether these underground chambers were ever intended for real use, or whether they were simply design flukes, noble intentions gone astray in stone and soot. But the sheer quantity of scrolls, notes, and tied feathers suggests something more. Something organized. You pocket a scroll. Bertrand pockets the cheese. And together, you retreat back through the winding flue path, past the squirrel mark, past the soot-stained rooster, and up into the flickering candlelight of the palace pantry. The light has never looked so bright. When you emerge, the steward is waiting. He says nothing. Just stares at the soot on your face, the torn sleeve, the faint smell of cologne soup wafting from your cloak. Then he hands you a fresh towel and a note. You unfold it. It's from the king. One line. I knew you'd find it. Tomorrow, we go deeper. You sit down hard on a crate of nutmeg. And whisper to yourself, this was supposed to be about a chimney. That night, you dream of narrow spaces, of whispers, and of a pigeon, wearing a crown made of matchsticks, staring at you from inside a tunnel of smoke. When you wake, there's soot on your pillow. It's barely dawn when a knock raps gently at your chamber door. You roll over, groaning into your linen pillow, wondering if it's too late to join a monastery. One without chimneys. The knock comes again, firmer this time. You shuffle to the door, open it with one eye, and find a pageboy standing in full court regalia, far too alert for someone this vertical before breakfast. His Majesty requests your presence, the boy chirps. Expedition continues. Wear boots. You sigh. Not this again. 10 minutes later, you're dressed, scrubbed, and staggering into the Grand Hall of Maps, where Louis XIII stands dramatically before a series of newly unrolled parchments. They appear to be sketches of Versailles heating infrastructure, heavily annotated in the king's own hand. You count 3 exclamation points, 4 ink blotches, and a tiny doodle of what might be a pigeon in a crown. Ah, Julian, he says, turning to you with that gleam in his eye, the one he usually gets before doing something unwise with architecture. I believe we've found the convergence point. You blink. Of what? The flues. The tunnels. The airflow. All of it. He jabs a finger at the center of the map. Right here. Beneath the chapel. Under the vestry stairs. Of course. Where else would the palace's mysterious subterranean labyrinth intersect, if not beneath a room built for quiet contemplation and powdered wigs? You and Bertrand, now unofficially promoted to Royal Passage Reconnaissance Artisan, are sent to inspect the stairs. You descend past stone saints and stern-eyed cherubs until you reach a small, padlocked wooden hatch beneath a candelabrum. Bertrand sniffs the hinge. Definitely hasn't been opened in years, he says. Smells like old hymnals and damp secrets. He cracks the lock open with a gentle chisel tap. You shine your lantern down into the darkness. There, carved into the stone threshold, are 2 words. Pa revenir, don't return. You share a glance. Then Bertrand, naturally, goes first. The descent is slow. Dust clouds rise with every step. The air thickens, not just with age but with intention. This space was meant to be hidden. Not in the goops, forgot a basement sort of way, but the let's never speak of this again sort. The passage leads to a round chamber. The air is warmer here. Still. Too still. In the center, a large stone hearth, an ancient hearth blackened with age, capped by what appears to be the base of a chimney long disconnected from above. You step closer. It feels familiar. Chillingly so. Bertrand circles it, whispering measurements to himself. Then you notice the carvings. Symbols etched faintly into the stone, a pigeon, a flame, a crown, and, again, that stylized eye. The same one from the scroll. The same one that seems to follow you through candlelight. You brush the ash from the mantle. Beneath it is a plaque. Faded, but legible. Flamme de vérité. The flame of truth. You blink. I think, you whisper, this was the original chimney. Bertrand doesn't laugh. A mainstream historical fact, before Versailles became the ornate palace we know, it was a hunting lodge, simple, small, and deeply functional. There are fragments of that older structure buried beneath the walls, beneath the floors. Most were built over, some sealed away. But legends persist. Of secret fires, sacred hearths, and the flamme de vérité. Supposedly, it was a place where oaths were made. Where confessions were burned. Where those loyal to the crown met in silence, wrote in soot, and vanished into tunnels lined with limestone and secrecy. It sounds like fairy tale nonsense. Except you're standing in it. Here, Bertrand says suddenly, pointing at the hearthstone. A groove. Too uniform to be natural. He brushes away the dust. A small compartment. Inside, an object wrapped in faded blue cloth. You unwrap it. A badge. Brass, soot-blackened, with a pigeon and a key crossed behind a flame. Bertrand lets out a slow breath. There was a society. You nod. Dedicated to the preservation of truth, or maybe to ventilation systems, you say. He shrugs. Both. You sit against the wall, parchment on your knees, sketching the badge, the carvings, the room. It's cold down here, but not unpleasant. Just ancient. A memory trapped in stone. Then, something shifts. A breeze. Not strong. Not alarming. But very clearly flowing upward from beneath the hearth. There's another tunnel. And this one breathes. Back upstairs, the king is pacing, hands behind his back, muttering about pigeons as divine messengers. When you report your findings, he listens in total silence. Then he says, "We continue tomorrow." Then adds, "But tonight we celebrate." You look confused. He claps you on the shoulder. The feast of the flu. You blink. That's not a real thing. It is now, he says. By sunset, the east wing is lit with candles shaped like chimneys. Soot-colored bunting hangs from balconies. There are pastries dusted in charcoal sugar and fig tarts arranged like smoke spirals. Pierre the pigeon is seated at the head table on a custom perch, pecking contemplatively at a silver dish of pumpkin seeds. The king gives a toast. To truth. To tunnels. To timely pigeon interventions. Everyone cheers. Someone plays a flute. Someone else faints from excitement. Bertrand dances with a broom. You lean back against a pillar, nibbling a soot bun, and wonder how this all started. A chimney. A draft. A very bad decision. And now, somehow, you're part of a mystery older than the velvet on the throne cushions. That night, you fall asleep with the badge under your pillow. And in your dreams, the flues whisper your name. You awaken to music. Not the usual plucked harps or melancholy flutes drifting through Versailles at dawn, but something stranger, lower, warmer, echoing faintly through the walls like someone humming into a pipe. You lie in bed, listening. It's rhythmic. Intentional. Almost like chanting? You sit up. The badge, the one you found in the chamber beneath the chapel, is still beneath your pillow, and it's warm. Or maybe that's just your imagination. Either way, you're officially spooked. And also, of course, summoned. A page knocks. No words. Just a small silver card. His Majesty awaits you at the Hall of Fireplaces. Of course he does. The Hall of Fireplaces is exactly what it sounds like, a long marble corridor lined with every known style of hearth. Gothic, Baroque, Ottoman, one made entirely of coral for some reason, and one that always smells faintly of pickles, no matter how often it's scrubbed. The king is standing at the end, staring contemplatively into an unlit grate. "Julian," he says without turning, "have you ever heard of the echo line?" You blink. "No, Your Majesty." He taps the cold stone with his cane. "It's a theory. A sequence of chimneys designed to carry not just smoke, but sound. Whisper in one, and another hearth hears you. You stare at the fireplace. It's wide, built with angled bricks and a curved flue. The architects of old, Lewis continues, may have built more than fireplaces. They built instruments. Instruments of communion. You're not sure if this is brilliant, unhinged, or both. He turns now, eyes gleaming. We're going to test it. A court musician is fetched. Then another. Then a third, because the first two begin arguing about the proper key for chimney acoustics. Eventually, one of them stands inside the hearth with a lute, plucking notes up into the shaft. The rest of you scatter to adjacent rooms, each posted at a different fireplace. You wait. Quiet. Candle flickering beside you. Then, a sound. Not a melody exactly. But a tone. Clear. Muted. As though someone whispered into velvet and the velvet whispered back. It's working. You report back to the king. His smile is triumphant. This changes everything, he whispers. You're not entirely sure what it changes, but you nod respectfully anyway. A mainstream historical fact: sound-carrying architecture was not unheard of in the early modern world. Some chapels were designed with special alcoves to transmit whispers from one end to another. Some domes reflected sermons across entire halls. But chimneys? That's new. At least officially. Unofficially, there have always been stories. About hearts that remembered secrets. About murmurs rising from cold grates in the middle of the night. About voices. Later, in the royal study, Louis XIII is drawing. Furiously. Sketches of flues. Arrows. Curves. Symbols. One labeled chorale shaft, subject to pigeon interference. You recognize that stylized eye again, his version, now. He's adopted it. A symbol of curiosity. And control. You're dismissed for the afternoon, but instead of resting, you slip back into the old flue passage beneath the chapel. The badge in your pocket feels heavier now. Like it knows something you don't. You pass the now familiar carvings. The flame. The crown. The pigeon. But today, you bring a tool, a small brass whistle Bertrand lent you, supposedly tuned to the room. You kneel beside the old hearth, press your ear to the stone, and blow. It's almost silent. Almost. But after a moment, you hear a response. Not a whistle. Not an echo. A knock. 3 short taps, very far below. You leap back. The room feels suddenly warmer. You turn slowly, candle held high, illuminating the walls. The soot has shifted. There's a new mark. 3 lines. Fresh. And a single word scratched beneath them. Encore. Again. You swallow. Whatever this is, it's not finished. You report to Bertrand, who listens in grim silence and then says, it wants something. What does? He shrugs. The structure. The stone. The system. That's not helpful. Nor is whistling at fireplaces, but here we are. He decides it's time to inspect the flue from the outside again, starting with the oldest part of the palace, the servants' wing, rumored to sit atop the remains of the original hunting lodge kitchen. It's a neglected area. The bricks are crumbling. The soot here is ancient. And yet, you find it. A shaft, blocked long ago with mortar, half covered in ivy. Bertrand scrapes away the growth and finds an iron plate bolted over the entrance. Stamped into the plate, faint but legible, are 4 words. Chantement réservé au feu. Singing reserved for fire. You take 3 steps back. Bertrand exhales sharply. Then he looks at you. We're going in tomorrow. That night, you attend a candlelit dinner hosted by the Queen, who still pretends not to know about the tunnels. She makes a pointed comment about soot getting into everything these days, while staring directly at your collar. The courtiers laugh. You try not to spill wine on your notes. Pierre the pigeon is absent tonight. Which makes everyone a little nervous. Back in your quarters, you examine the badge again. You brush away some soot from the back. There's an engraving you hadn't noticed before. 2 flues. A line between them. And below that, a date. 1607. Older than the chapel. Older than the king. Possibly older than Versailles itself. And beside it, the letters, CCS. You don't know what they mean yet. But you're about to find out. Because tomorrow, you descend again. Into stone. Into song. Into something that never stopped burning. The day begins like thunder holding its breath. Gray clouds hang heavy over Versailles, the kind that seem to press against the rooftops, like they're trying to listen. The wind skips low across the courtyards, rifling powdered wigs and tugging at brocade sleeves. It feels like the palace itself is preparing. You, for your part, are sitting on a crate outside the old servants' wing, chewing a hunk of slightly stale bread and trying not to imagine the words singing reserved for fire echoing endlessly beneath your feet. Bertrand arrives, carrying a lantern, a rope, and what appears to be a wooden spoon. For leverage, he explains, before you can ask. Emotional or structural? Both. The flue entrance is colder than you remember. The iron plate groans like an old man as it's unbolted. The air that escapes is dense, not stinking, not foul, just full. Like the scent of forgotten things. You crawl through first. The tunnel is narrow and circular, walls black with ancient soot. Your candle struggles to burn straight. Behind you, Bertrand breathes heavily, muttering measurements under his breath. 12 paces in, the shaft widens. Arches curve overhead. Stone ribs, like the belly of a sleeping beast. You run your hand along one wall and feel something carved deep into the soot. Music. Not notes, not quite. But symbols. Pictograms that resemble flames and mouths and waves. Choral code, Bertrand murmurs. I saw this once beneath Rouen. A lost cathedral chimney. You blink. There are others? He nods. Not many. And most sealed. You press onward. Eventually, you reach a circular space. A room, somehow, at the heart of the flue system. It's not large, perhaps the size of a bakery oven, but it resonates. Every step, every breath seems to ripple through the air. At the center, a grate. Not for heat. For sound. Above it, rising into darkness, is the vertical shaft of the Grand Flue. The chorale shaft, as the king called it. The one that might touch every chimney in Versailles, if the drawings are right. You and Bertrand sit. Light a candle. And wait. Nothing happens at first. Then Bertrand hums. Just a single note, low and long. The sound spirals upward, caught in the shape of the room, twisted through the shaft like smoke. The walls seem to absorb it, then release it slowly, as if answering. Then you hear it. Faint. Far away. A reply. Not an echo. A voice. CCS, it says. You freeze. Bertrand's mouth opens, but no words come. CCS, it repeats. The voice is neither male nor female. Neither warm nor cold. Just present. You look at the badge in your hand. The engraving. CCS. You whisper, what does it stand for? The answer comes slowly, coiling through the flue like incense. The morning is gray, overcast, and faintly metallic. The kind of sky that presses gently against your shoulders like a polite but firm librarian asking you to lower your voice. Somewhere, pigeons coo uneasily. You meet Bertrand near the east servants' wing, where the chimney shaft with the iron plate waits. He's already pulled away most of the ivy, revealing the bolts, the ancient warning, and a tiny rusted hinge that looks like it last opened during the reign of a different species. The king is not in attendance today. He's decided to observe from a respectful and safe distance, which apparently means reclining on a chaise lounge on the roof with a monocle. A servant passes you a note from him. It reads, if it sings, do not harmonize without me. You nod solemnly. Bertrand unscrews the last bolt, and the iron plate groans open. The smell is immediate: damp stone, scorched herbs, and something incense-like. Inside is a narrow stairwell spiraling down. The walls are blackened, not just from soot, but from use. This was a working flue. One that saw centuries of fire. You descend carefully, lantern held high. The stone grows warmer. At the bottom is a room. Round. Low-ceilinged. Lined with what appear to be pews, stone benches built into the wall, facing a central hearth. On the hearth, a black iron bowl filled with ash. The room isn't entirely empty. There are objects. A rusted lyre with 2 missing strings. A set of iron tongs engraved with the same stylized eye. A single leather-bound book. You open the book. It's not in French. It's in Latin. Maybe. You can make out fragments. Vox per flamma, voice through flame. Confessio per murmur, confession by murmur. C.C.S, repeated on nearly every page. You sit on the stone bench and turn the pages with growing unease. These aren't spells. They're instructions. Rituals. Procedures. Chants. A mainstream historical fact: in the 16th and early 17th centuries, some secret societies used architecture as part of their communication systems. Hidden libraries. Echo chambers. Even whispering walls in certain abbeys where penitent monks could speak confessions without revealing their identity. But this? This is something more focused. More organized. You find a page with a diagram. Two flues, twisting like mirrored snakes, and a seated figure in the center, holding what looks like a staff or a long chimney brush. Beneath it, Cantor's Caminorum Secreta. Bertrand looks over your shoulder. CCS, he says. You nod. The chimney choir of secrets? He blinks. That's awful. You try again. Choral conclave of soot? Worse. He thinks. Could be Caminus conclave silentium. You raise an eyebrow. The silent chimney conclave? He shrugs. They were architects. Not poets. You examine the hearth bowl more closely. The ash inside is deep. Layered. Bertrand prods it gently with a copper rod. Something glints. You reach in. A ring. Silver. Engraved with the eye, the crown, and a flame. On the inside, a phrase. Parle si tu oses. Speak, if you dare. You sit back on your heels. There was a time, clearly, when someone used this place for speech. Not conversation. Not gossip. Speech. Deliberate. Ritualized. Sacred, maybe. You wonder if the king suspects how deep this goes. Bertrand lights a small brazier with dried sage. The room fills with the scent, smoky, sharp, and somehow soothing. And then, you hear it. The faintest sound. Not from above. From within the walls. A low tonal hum, like a voice held just beyond your hearing. You press your ear to the stone. It's singing. Not words. But notes. 3 long tones. Then silence. Then a knock. Bertrand grips your arm. We should go. You don't move. Something compels you to stay. To answer. You find your candle, hold it over the hearth bowl, and speak. Encore. The room exhales. That's the only way you can describe it. A warm gust rises from the flue. The flame on your candle flutters sideways, not upward. The ring in your pocket grows hot. Bertrand curses softly. Then, a voice. Clear. Soft. Old. 2 ports la flamme. You carry the flame. You don't reply. Because you are no longer in a room with just Bertrand. There's a presence now. Not seen. Not threatening. But certain. Watching. Waiting. Then, just as quickly, it's gone. The warmth recedes. The candle returns to its gentle vertical flicker. The room smells only of sage. The stone feels ordinary. Bertrand lets out a breath he'd been holding for too long. You pocket the ring. And you ascend the stairs in silence. Back in daylight, the king greets you with a peach tart and a lute player composing something called Ballad for a Braver Flue. You hand him the ring. He turns it over in his palm. Then, softly, they met there, didn't they? You nod. Not just for smoke, he says. For truth. He smiles. Then, looking into the distance, we must build again. Not bigger. Not grander. But deeper. You resist the urge to faint. Later that evening, in the kitchens, the staff debates what CCS might stand for. Courtiers cooking soup? Cousins of the crown's shadows? Certainly chimney shenanigans? You don't correct them. You just smile. And privately, you begin drawing your own version of the eye. One with a spark inside it. Because the flame isn't done. Not yet. And you've been marked. Whether you like it or not. Morning breaks over Versailles like a spilled goblet of cream, soft, warm, a little sticky. The palace stretches awake in sighs and creaks, and somewhere, a page sneezes into a curtain because the dust never quite settles, no matter how many hours the maids beat the rugs. You, however, are already dressed and halfway down the west corridor by the time the kitchens fire their first ovens. Why? Because the bishop has heard rumors. And whenever the bishop hears rumors, you're the one sent to interpret them. You find him in the royal chapel's rear chamber, hunched over a manuscript with a magnifying glass and an expression that suggests the ink has personally insulted him. He greets you with a solemn nod. The king says you saw something. You hesitate. That depends how you define saw. Did it whisper? Yes. He snaps the book shut. Then it's time. Time for what, exactly? You're not sure, until he produces a small wooden box and places it gently on the chapel's lectern. He opens it like he's unveiling a relic. Inside, a row of jars, each filled with what looks like butter. You blink. This is consecrated greases, the bishop says gravely. Anointed oils. Salves. Pomades of purification. You count: thyme, sage, pigeon feather essence, and something labeled only herbal clarity. He passes you a jar. It's for your ears. Pardon? To protect against deceitful echoes. Never enter the lower flues without anointing first. You try to protest, but he's already dipping a cloth and daubing your temples like a weary alchemist. A mainstream historical fact: many old religious orders believed that sound could carry spiritual residue, especially sound echoing through stone. Certain monasteries refused to speak near pillars. Some abbeys banned chanting beneath domes after dark. Echoes, they believed, could return altered. You're beginning to understand why. Today's mission: examine the royal wardrobe chimney. Apparently, the king suspects that particular flue, ornate, little used, and lined with Dutch tile, might serve as a resonance chamber in the ancient system. Also, he adds, I once lost a slipper there. Bertrand joins you, of course. Now equipped with a new leather tool belt and a hat he insists is for flue-based rituals only. You step into the wardrobe and immediately realize two things. The chimney is absurdly decorative: sculpted lions, painted flames, and gold leaf in places that absolutely don't need gold. There's a draft that smells like cardamom and old letters. You duck into the hearth. The passage above is narrower than the others. Less ash. More polished. You and Bertrand squeeze upward until you reach a horizontal bend, then drop into a small alcove lined with shelves. Empty shelves. Except for one item. A single, perfectly preserved slipper. Velvet. Embroidered. The king's. You stare at it. Is this the source, you ask? Bertrand shrugs. Or bait. And then it happens again. A whisper. Not behind you this time. Around you. Through the walls. A gentle murmur, like someone reading a poem aloud through fabric. You freeze. Bertrand reaches for your arm. You both hold your breath. La vérité est écoute. The voice trails off. Truth listens. You drop to your knees and trace the tiles. There, just behind the slipper, is a panel. Looser than the others. You pry it open, revealing a carved funnel behind it, spiraling, narrow, and glinting with soot-smooth edges. A sound pipe. A deliberate construction. Meant to carry voice. Not heat. Not smoke. But voice. And now you know why it was hidden. Because sometimes, secrets are built to be heard, not spoken. You return to the king, who's now wearing a robe that resembles a curtain from a very expensive dream. You show him the slipper. He gasps. My left foot. You pause. You remember the exact foot? Of course, he says indignantly. It had the emerald button. I stubbed the toe during a duel with the Marquis of Fig. You nod slowly, unsure whether that's a metaphor or just Versailles. You try to explain the funnel, the design, the voice. The king listens with increasing excitement. Then we must test it, he declares. Within the hour, the wardrobe chimney has been transformed into a testing chamber. At the base, you, with a scroll and a lute for audio control. Above, a courtier with the slipper, a flag, and a bag of sugar cubes, don't ask. You pluck the lute softly, strum a chord. The slipper is tapped 3 times. The funnel catches it perfectly, amplifies it. Like a listening horn, turned inward. This flue, it seems, was designed to hear confessions. Not just from the chapel below, but from the rooms around it. A fringe historical tidbit: several Renaissance palaces experimented with listening devices disguised as ornamentation. Fluted walls. Hollow columns. In Venice, a staircase once transmitted whispers from the servants' hall into the Duchess's private chamber. It was eventually filled with soap. Versailles, it seems, went even further. You suspect someone in the past century wanted more than echoes. They wanted knowledge. Untraceable. Undeniable. Delivered by soot and heat and song. That evening, the king gathers his closest confidants, plus Pierre the pigeon, now wearing a sash, for a secret council. There is wine. There is duck. There is, eventually, a plan. We're going to map the network, the king declares. Every flue. Every echo chamber. Every listening shaft. The steward protests, "Sire, there are hundreds." Then we'd best get started, Louis says. Pierre will supervise. You are handed a compass. A bundle of parchment. And a badge. Not the old one. A new one. Forged in brass. In the shape of a chimney. Emblazoned with the motto, Veritas per ignum. Truth through fire. You look up at the king. He raises his goblet. To the new order, he says, of soot and sound. You clink your glass against his. And for the first time, you don't laugh. Because you're starting to believe it.
By now, the soot has worked its way into your pores. Your boots smell faintly of pine resin and burnt sugar. And somewhere deep in your soul, you know the architectural layout of Versailles better than your own childhood home. It's official, you are now the palace's foremost flue scout. The king, not content with merely being France's reigning monarch, has taken to calling himself commandant of the quiet fires. You're not sure if he's joking. No one is. Especially not Bertrand, who now carries a set of soot-polished measuring rods and refers to every hallway as a whisper corridor. And today, your target is one of the strangest yet, the abandoned Salon des Perruques, the old wig salon, long sealed off, supposedly due to hazardous drafts. Hazardous drafts. You've never felt more alive. The entrance is down a disused corridor behind the orangery, hidden behind a wardrobe full of obsolete wigs and mothball-scented melancholy. The door creaks open with the kind of theatrical groan that suggests it's been waiting for this moment. Inside, dust dances in the sunlight like powdered ghosts. The room is circular, ringed with sconces and mirrors. There's an unlit hearth at the far end, over which hangs a long-dead spider and a faded painting of an extremely judgmental-looking man in a powdered wig. The air smells like pomade and forgotten secrets. You kneel by the fireplace. It's cold. Perfectly, unnaturally cold. Bertrand runs his fingers along the stonework and mutters, "This flue isn't out of use. It's out of favor." You ask what that means. He says nothing. But he lights a candle and drops the flame into the hearth. It gutters, then flares blue. Then, a low tone. Not a voice. Not music. A th note. Sustained. Perfect. Eerie. A mainstream historical fact, wig salons at Versailles were as much about gossip as grooming. Courtiers would gather to be styled, powdered, and strategically informed. Some salons were designed with acoustics in mind, vaulted ceilings and curved walls for conversation to carry. But this room? This wasn't for talking. This was for listening. You trace the hearth's interior with your lantern. There's writing etched deep into the rear brickwork, almost lost in centuries of soot. 3 words. Silence ist pouvoir. Silence is power. You feel a chill that isn't from the stone. Then something shifts behind the wall. A soft click. And a panel opens. Inside, a tunnel. Narrow. Angular. But not forgotten. And beside it, resting on a tiny brass shelf, is a note. Folded. Crisp. Recently placed. You open it. He listens still. Step carefully. It's unsigned. You and Bertrand exchange a look. You light your second lantern. And you go in. The passage isn't long, but it slopes sharply upward. At one point you pass behind a tapestry of a battle scene and peek through a pinhole to discover the royal drawing room on the other side. You press on. Eventually, the tunnel ends in a small alcove, a sort of viewing chamber, with 3 narrow chimneys converging at odd angles into a flared stone horn in the ceiling. And carved above that, pour entendre ce tu en enos dire. To hear what cannot be said. Bertrand whispers, it's a listening hive. You nod. Not for one voice. For many. This is where secrets went to echo. You test the acoustics. Bertrand sings a scale. The notes rise, then refract. You hear them return, warped slightly, as though another voice is harmonizing in secret. You say your name. It returns. But not in your voice. Yours is lighter. Nervous. This one is older. Surer. You back away slowly. Back in the salon, you report to the king, who's arrived in a wig shaped like a torch flame and carrying a map labeled known soot channels. He listens, wide-eyed. Then, excellent. We have the place. We just need a chorus. You blink. A chorus? Yes, he says, pacing excitedly. Not for entertainment. For testing. If that hive chamber amplifies sound the way I suspect, we need multiple singers strategically placed across the flues. Strategically placed. He taps his map. Here. Here. And definitely someone in the laundry chimney. I've always suspected that one was hiding something. By afternoon, you've rounded up 3 court musicians, one of whom refuses to sing unless paid in custard. A reluctant falconer with surprising range. 2 pastry apprentices who harmonize in their sleep. And Pierre the pigeon, who perches above the salon like a soot-streaked cherub. The choir begins. Softly at first. 1 note, carried through the flue. Then another, from the laundry chimney. Then the 3rd, from the kitchen shaft. You stand in the hive. And you hear it. A chord. Low. Mournful. Beautiful. And beneath it, just for a moment, between the vibrations, the harmonies, you hear something else. A whisper. La Coronic out. The crown listens. A fringe tidbit, in the 17th century, some believed that echoes could carry memory. That sounds, repeated often enough, lingered in stone. There were whispered tales of hearth hauntings in which the words of the dead replayed in chimney corners for years after they passed. You'd never believed it. Until now. Because the crown is listening. And maybe has been for a very long time. You emerge, dizzy and smoke-smudged. The king clasps your shoulder. It worked. You nod. Too well. He grins. Then we're nearly ready. You pause. Ready for what? He leans close to speak to them. You blink. Who? He raises an eyebrow. The ones who never left. That night, you lie awake. The badge glows faintly by candlelight. In the silence, you think you hear your name. Once. From the hearth. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just an invitation. Versailles wakes under a thick layer of mist the next morning, as if the palace has pulled the sky's bedsheets over its head. The fountains gurgle sleepily. Statues gleam with dew. And you haven't slept. You spent the night staring at the hearth in your room, waiting for it to speak again. It didn't. But it watched. You're sure of that. The king greets you over a breakfast of honeyed chestnuts and roasted pear. He looks radiant, well-rested, powdered, and more dangerously enthusiastic than usual. Julian, he says, waving away a footman offering a fourth napkin, today we send the message. You blink. What message? He leans in, conspiratorial. To the choir. You pause. The ancient echo society of soot-based truth whisperers. He nods gravely. Exactly. Do we here know what they want? Of course not, he says, and pops a chestnut into his mouth. That's why we're asking. The message must be delivered properly, he insists. Through a chimney that resonates with both architectural authority and emotional sincerity. So naturally, he chooses the Queen's winter dressing room fireplace. You object. He overrules you. Preparations begin. Musicians are stationed in 3 adjacent flues to harmonize the signal. A choir boy is placed near the pastry oven. The bishop is called to sanctify the soot. Bertrand coats the chimney interior with rosewater and ash to make the acoustics more respectful. The Queen, upon discovering her fireplace has been reproposed into a divine flue conduit, says only, if he sings in my mirror again, he's sleeping in the orchard. Everyone nods solemnly. The king dons a robe made entirely of quilted velvet embers. You take your position at the hearth with a scroll, an echo gauge, a small bell attached to a string, and the speech. Yes. There's a speech. A mainstream historical fact, royal declarations were often delivered with great flair, even when there was no audience. Kings read aloud to empty rooms. Queens wrote letters to paintings. There were official decrees made solely for the listening pleasure of hedgerow pigeons. But this? This is the first one addressed to a network of semi-mythical soot listeners beneath a palace. Maybe. You unroll the parchment. The king clears his throat. Bertrand lights the ceremonial soot candle. The musicians begin, 3 notes, perfectly spaced. Then silence. And the king speaks. To the keepers of the flue. Heirs of smoke. Bards of brick and soot. We hear your silence. We honor your echoes. And we, your descendants by dust. Wish to ask. He pauses. You lean in. What do you want? The words vanish up the chimney. You wait. 1 second. 2. 3. The wind shifts. The flame flickers. Then, from the opposite flue, in a room no one is in, a bell rings. Just once. Then again. Then a 3rd time. Then silence. You rush there, heart hammering. The hearth is cold. But inside, just visible, is a soot-written word. Equilibre. Balance. You bring the word back. The king studies it like scripture. Balance, he murmurs. They're warning us. Of what? He sips a clove-laced cordial. Of too much listening. Or too little speaking. You blink. That's the same warning either way. He grins. Exactly. A new plan is born. A test. The king orders one of the oldest flues reopened, one that connects the wine cellar, the laundry room, and the East Conservatory. The theory, this tri-flue will reveal how balance can be restored. By speaking. By listening. Simultaneously. Simultaneity is sacred, he insists. That's how choirs work. You're no longer sure if this is theology, engineering, or a very long poem. But you nod. Because you've stopped resisting the absurd. You've become part of it. Bertrand prepares the flue. A goat named Honoré delivers fresh chalk for marking resonance points. Don't ask why it's a goat, you've stopped asking. 3 chimney scouts are dispatched. You take the central position. Scroll in hand. And when the signal comes, a bell, a plume of lavender smoke, and a pigeon feather descending from the ceiling, you begin. You speak. Low. Measured. Sincere. You say. We built upward to be seen. You built inward to be heard. We are not so different. Teach us. You wait. The soot stirs. No voice this time. But a wind rises inside the chimney, but not in the room. A reverse wind. Inhaling. And then? A second word. Etched by ash. Barely visible. Souffle. Breath. Breath and balance. Fire and air. Listening and speaking. You look at Bertrand. He nods slowly. They're reminding us. A fire can't burn without breath. But too much? It suffocates. You sit down beside the hearth, head in your hands. Bertrand, you whisper. I think the flues are trying to teach the king about moderation. Bertrand sighs. He's not going to like that. Later that evening, at the Soot Scout debriefing banquet, now a regular event, the king makes a toast. To the voices of the past. The pipes of the present. And the pigeons who carry tomorrow. Pierre coos softly. You clink goblets with Bertrand. And you wonder. What happens when you understand the message? Do you stop listening? Or do you listen harder? You wake up with soot on your cheek and a spoon in your bed. Not your spoon. Not even a clean spoon. One that smells faintly of gooseberry and flue resin. You sit up slowly, the badge around your neck clinking against your collarbone, and find a folded scrap of parchment under your pillow. Tonight. The royal carpenter knows. Bring the ring. No signature. No clue. Just another entry in the growing pile of mystery invitations you seem to receive these days like their dinner menus. You sigh, stretch, and notice that the spoon is engraved with a pigeon. Of course it is. You find Bertrand outside the cabinetmaker's workshop, sanding a piece of walnut as though it's insulted his ancestors. Got a note, you say. So did I, he grunts, not looking up. This time, it was sewn into a loaf of bread. That's subtle. I broke a tooth. He gestures toward a bundle of tools at his feet. We're going down again. By down, he means deep. Beneath the royal wine vaults, past the experimental preserves chamber, through a crumbling archway so damp it smells like polite mildew and regret. This part of the palace has no name. Which, of course, makes it important. A heavy door bars your way. Bertrand produces a small iron key, not his, not the king's. One that came, he says, from a nun who owed a favor. You do not ask. It clicks open. Inside, stairs. Cold ones. Old ones. You descend. At the base is a room not carved, not built, but grown into. The stone walls ripple with irregular curves. At the center, a basin of black iron. On the far wall, a hearth, not for fire, but for voice. Above it, etched deep. Chamber de l'air ténu. Room of the tenuous air. Bertrand lights a lantern. You hold up the ring. It hums. Softly. And then, a voice. Familiar. Not human. Pierre. He's perched on the lip of the hearth. Holding something in his beak. A scroll. You unfurl it. The writing is older than Versailles. Charcoal, faded. A script neither of you recognize until Bertrand turns it sideways. It's a cipher, he says, pulling a coin from his pocket. Watch. He lays the coin against the scroll. The markings align. Each letter connects to a symbol from the flue carvings: eye, flame, feather, crown. It spells a single phrase. The breath must not break. You both stare. Because you know what that means. Something is about to go wrong. A mainstream historical fact: chimneys collapse more often than people think. Especially ones built on experimental principles. During Louis XII's reign, a portion of the South Wing's flue system failed completely, buried beneath what's now the Hall of Ambassadors. It was sealed. And, officially, forgotten. You know where it is. The king wants it reopened. Back above, you try to dissuade him. It's unstable, you argue. He waves a hand. So is politics. It could collapse. So could Spain. He smiles, places a hand on your shoulder. They left us a map, he says. Acquire that trusted stone. We owe them an answer. You nod. Because what else is there to do? That afternoon, preparations begin. Ropes. Ladders. Chalk. Bertrand mutters the phrase airflow stress mapping under his breath at least 37 times. The site is behind a panel in the West Gallery, disguised as a bookcase no one has opened in decades. You pry it back to reveal soot-stained bricks, hairline fractures, and the faint smell of something old. The king arrives with a cloak lined in feathers to honor the pigeon. You try not to cry. You remove the first brick. The dust moans. Behind it, darkness. A tunnel leading into the silent wing, the part of the flue system untouched since the collapse. You and Bertrand enter. Every step echoes too long. The air is wrong. Heavy. Wet. Like breath that's forgotten how to exhale. And then, you see it. A wall. Blackened. Cracked. Painted in the ancient hand. Trop de voix. Trop de few. Too many voices. Too much fire. It's a warning. And a history. And a confession. All in one. You return to the king. We shouldn't open it further, you say. It's not just unstable. It's morning. He pauses. Then nods. Then we mark it. Honor it. And build beside it. A new plan. Not restoration. Integration. You will chart the new flue lines around the old. Leave space for the breath to rest. Respect the collapse. And maybe, if you do it right, the voices will forgive you. That night, in the secret dining hall of the Soot Scouts, the king announces the new branch. La route du souffle. The breath route. A path of flues left intentionally hollow. Unused. Sacred. You're given the ceremonial scroll to sign. Your name now joins Bertrand's, the king's, Pierre's, via ink-stained claw print, and 20 others. The silent flue is sealed. Not with bricks. But with music. 3 notes. A pause. A final breath. And then silence. Complete. Honored. And eternal. You wake to silence. True silence, not the sleepy bustle of chambermaids or the distant clatter of pastry trays. Not the echo of guards patrolling or the polite snoring of a nearby nobleman with a brandy habit. Just nothing. Even the chimney is quiet. No draft. No whisper. Not even Pierre's usual rustling above the mantel. And that's what unsettles you. Because by now, you've grown used to the palace breathing. When you arrive at the East Flue Archive, formerly a linen closet, you find Bertrand already pacing, beard bristling in irritation. It's not just you, he mutters. No air. No echo. The pipes are holding their breath. You blink. can they do that? They can if something's blocking the main resonance line. You feel a chill, not just of worry, but memory. The phrase from the old cipher scroll. The breath must not break. Something is wrong. The king appears, still dressed for breakfast, carrying a half-eaten cinnamon roll and a rolled-up architectural plan. "Good morning," he says, utterly unaware of the creeping dread. "Are we ready to harmonize the pigeonary flu today?" You and Bertrand stare. "My liege," you begin carefully, "there's been a disruption." The king's face falls. "A disruption?" "Of the breath." He says it like it's a national treasure. You nod gravely. Bertrand thinks there may be a blockage. The king gasps. "Sabotage?" "We don't know that yet." "Possibly squirrels?" Bertrand interjects, "It could be condensation collapse from thermal irregularity." The king's eyes widen. "We're under steamy attack." You sigh. "Let's investigate first." You head straight to the Grand Junction shaft, where 3 of Versailles' oldest flues converge beneath the former embroidery hall. It's the heart of the airflow system and the core of the choir's acoustic channel. You've never seen it completely still. But today? Not a flicker of air. Bertrand lights incense and places it in the hearth. The smoke rises, halfway. Then hangs. Then curls downward. "Reversal," he whispers. You've never seen him look nervous before. And then the king points to the wall. "Wait. That wasn't there yesterday." A crack. Thin. Jagged. And just above it, a small burst of soot. Like the shaft exhaled. A mainstream historical fact, in certain early ventilation systems, pressure differentials could cause the entire airflow network to reverse briefly, especially during storms or sudden heat drops. It wasn't just unpleasant. It could be catastrophic for stonework not designed to breathe backward. If a collapse is beginning, it might cascade. One flue at a time. Through the whole palace. You move quickly. First to the archives, where old blueprints show a secondary route, the courier's flue, built centuries ago to warm mailrooms and inner chambers. It's long been dormant. But it could serve as a pressure release. If unsealed. You grab your tools. Bertrand grabs rope. The king grabs Pierre. The mailroom chimney hasn't been touched in generations. It's narrow, crooked, and smells like burnt ink and damp envelopes. You and Bertrand crawl inside, candles strapped to your belts. The deeper you go, the warmer it gets. Not hot. Warm like breath caught in the throat. And then you hear it. The faint, pulsing sound of stone settling. "Quick," Bertrand mutters. The grating. You reach the midpoint. A metal gate, rusted in place. Beyond it, a round chamber, full of swirling soot. The pressure is building. The breath is trapped. You work fast, prying bolts, easing the grate aside. Bertrand braces the ceiling with a beam. One final pull. Whump. Air rushes past you. Outward. Free. The soot lifts like fog. And the chimney sighs. A deep, resonant tone vibrates through the flue. Then another. Then, impossibly, a voice. Soft. Choral. Singing. You and Bertrand freeze. It's not echo. It's not collapse. It's them. The old choir. Just for a moment. Then silence returns. Clean. Peaceful. You emerge soot-covered and trembling. The king clasps your arm, wide-eyed. You heard it, didn't you? You nod. Bertrand wipes his hands on his vest. They were warning us. Not scolding us. The king looks toward the chapel tower. And now they've exhaled. That evening, the air in Versailles feels new. Clear. Every hearth has a steady pull again. The breeze flows like it's been reborn. In the grand hall, the king holds a quiet ceremony. He calls it the breathing. No music. No speeches. Just every fireplace lit in silence. Even Pierre perches solemnly by a mantle. One by one, the flues glow again. And through them, the palace sings, not loudly, not in words. Just in breath. The palace exhales. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the air moves as it should. No unexpected gusts, no eerie silences. Just a calm, steady rhythm, like the stone itself is breathing in time with the walls. The king declares it a national holiday. He names it le jour du souffle, the day of breath, and insists that everyone wear grey ribbons and speak only in metaphors until sundown. You're not sure whether to laugh or lie down forever. You return to the Grand Junction shaft with Bertrand the next morning, this time not in a rush, but in quiet reverence. The chamber is still warm. The air is still moving. Bertrand runs his hand along the stone. It feels content. You nod. Like it's asleep. But dreaming. He arches an eyebrow. You've been spending too much time near chimney fumes. You laugh, but it's not entirely a joke. Because ever since the flue sang, really sang, you haven't been able to shake the feeling that the palace itself is aware. Not alive, exactly. But listening. And now? Waiting. The king, too, has changed. He's softer now. Quieter. More thoughtful. He spends hours in his study, no longer sketching flue diagrams, but transcribing what he calls the teachings of the draft. You catch a glance at one scroll. The soot marks where truth has passed. The silence after is its echo. Profound? Maybe. Overwrought? Certainly. But somehow, it fits. A mainstream historical fact, several Enlightenment thinkers believed that architecture could influence not just behavior, but morality. That airflow, light, and proportion shaped the soul. Versailles, with its mirrored halls and impossible symmetry, was designed as much to impress as to guide. And here you are, guided by soot. Then comes the letter. Delivered by a boy wearing half a waistcoat and an expression of mild terror. It's sealed with a symbol you haven't seen before, a flame inside the eye. Bertrand opens it. His brow furrows. He hands it to you. You read aloud. You have passed the threshold. But the breath must be guarded. Come to the chimney behind the room of masks. At dusk. Alone. You both look at each other. You say what you're both thinking. There's a room of masks. There is. Nobody talks about it. You find it at the far end of the south wing, past two locked doors and a corridor so narrow you're forced to walk sideways. Inside, dozens of masks. Hanging on walls. Perched on stands. Resting on velvet-lined shelves. Porcelain, wood, leather, gilded silk. Some are theatrical. Others are not. You step lightly across the floor, aware of the faint layer of soot on the floorboards. At the far wall, a fireplace. Cold. Unused. Framed with mirrored tiles that reflect only in pieces. You kneel before it. And wait. Dusk spills through the narrow window like wine across a white tablecloth. The candle you brought gutters once. Twice. Then the draft changes. Just slightly. Enough to stir your hair. A whisper. Not a word. A breath. And then, from inside the flue, a hand emerges. Not alive. Not moving. Just holding something. Wrapped in cloth. You reach forward, very slowly, and take it. The hand retracts into shadow. Gone. You unwrap the bundle. Inside. A book. Bound in leather, marked with soot. Title. Livre du souffle perdu. Book of the Lost Breath. You flip it open. No words. Only diagrams. Circles. Flames. Spiral flues crossing like vines. And symbols. Some you've seen. Some entirely new. One page stops you. It shows Versailles. But beneath it, a network of flues so dense they resemble veins. At the center, a chamber. Larger than any you've found. Marked with only one phrase. Le quart du souffle. The heart of the breath. You swallow. Because now you understand what the palace has been building toward. All of it. The echoes. The singing. The whispers. The reverse wind. The breathing. It's all leading to this. That night, you take the book to the king. He reads it silently. Then sets down his goblet. It's not over, he says. It's only just beginning. You sit together by the hearth. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere, a flue whistles a faint, familiar note. And far below your feet, stone sighs. You spend the next day underground. Not metaphorically. Not in some comfortable, slightly dusty library full of scrolls and smug silence. No, under the palace. Crawling, ducking, charting. The Book of the Lost Breath has become your map, your obsession, your slowly smudging soot gospel. You and Bertrand, now officially co-commanders of Sub-Chimney Reconnaissance, have traced 7 new passages, for collapse sites, and one terrifyingly ornate furnace that appears to have been built solely to warm a harpsichord. But still, you haven't found it. The heart. It remains just out of reach. Buried beneath symbols, riddles, and decades of architectural ego. Until Pierre delivers the clue. It comes mid-afternoon. You're back in the Salon des Perruques, sipping lukewarm cider and trying to reassemble a half-burned blueprint with thread and regret, when the pigeon flutters in and lands on your shoulder like it's always lived there. He pecks your earlobe twice, then drops a scrap of parchment onto your lap. A single phrase. The balance lies beneath what never rises. Bertrand reads over your shoulder. The unused flue. You nod. Sealed from the start. Never lit. He frowns. That's the Queen's music room chimney. You blink. That's not connected to anything. Exactly. You explain it to the king in 3 sentences. He approves the expedition in 2. And in 1 hour you're standing before the sealed flue. Small. Narrow. Almost delicate. No ash. No draft. Just cold. Above it, etched into marble in faded gold. Chew on any eleve. Let it not be awakened. Which, naturally, is the perfect invitation to open it. Bertrand chips away at the seal. You brace the lantern. The king, present, of course, insists on narrating dramatically. Here, he intones, lies the passage forgotten not by time, but by intent. You cough. Bertrand mutters, less narrating. More lifting. And with a final crack, the hearthstone shifts. Revealing stairs. Spiraling. Downward. Of course. The descent is tighter than expected. You and Bertrand squeeze past ancient bricks, the king following with unnerving enthusiasm. He's wearing his flue cloak again, the one stitched with gold thread pigeons, and humming what might be the ballad of the Soot Scouts under his breath. At the bottom, a door. Not grand. Simple. Wooden. Unmarked, except for a single groove, circular, shallow. A perfect match for the badge you wear around your neck. You press it in. The door opens. You step into silence. Not the silence of an empty room. Not even the heavy hush of a forgotten corridor. This silence feels alive. It wraps around your shoulders. Settles in your lungs. Replaces thought. You're standing in a round chamber, impossibly wide, impossibly low. Every inch of wall is carved with flue patterns, arcs, spirals, loops. And at the very center, a hearth. Not stone. Not iron. But glass. You approach it slowly. It glows faintly. Not with fire, but with light from within. Pulsing. Like a heartbeat. The heart of the breath. A mainstream historical fact, certain late medieval stonemasons believed that buildings required a center of intention, a physical place within the structure where energy, focus, or spirit could gather. Sometimes a stone. Sometimes a carving. Rarely, a room. But never, until now, a chimney. The king kneels beside it. For the first time since this all began, he speaks softly. Without flourish. They built this not to heat rooms, he says, but to connect them. You nod. And not just rooms, you add. People. Bertrand circles the chamber slowly, fingers tracing the ancient flue markings. There's rhythm here, he mutters. This whole place breathes in patterns. You light a single candle and place it in the glass hearth. The flame flickers. Rises. And then? You hear it. A harmony. Soft. Distant. Impossible. It's not an echo. It's a response. Not just from this room. From all of them. The network is awake. The chamber vibrates gently. Notes pass through the walls like fish through water. Each pitch shifting, never jarring, never loud. Just pure. Somewhere far above, you know the flues are resonating. You picture servants pausing in the halls, hearing music from the walls. Nobles shifting uncomfortably in salons that suddenly hum with truth. Even Pierre, you suspect, is vibrating slightly. You sit beside the glass hearth and whisper, "Why now?" And from somewhere deep in the draft, the answer comes, not in words, but in warmth. The palace remembers. And it has chosen you. Later, when you and Bertrand emerge covered in soot and reverence, the king meets you in the garden. He holds out a fresh scroll. No wax. No decree. Just 3 words. Let it breathe. You nod. Because you understand. This isn't about unlocking secrets anymore. It's about listening. Not to whispers or warnings, but to silence. The kind that holds meaning. The kind that lives between words. And burns quietly. Forever. The next morning, the palace hums. Not loudly. Not intrusively. But undeniably. A low, contented harmony radiates from the flue network. You hear it in the hinges of the chapel doors. In the rustle of the curtains. In the kettle that begins to whistle a perfect A without ever boiling. Bertrand calls it resonant equilibrium. The king calls it a very well-behaved building. You just call it peace. For now. Your first task of the day is ceremonial. The king wants to name the central flue chamber. The glass heart, the secret lung of the palace. He proposes, salle du souffle sacre, room of the sacred breath. Bertrand suggests, the central sooty spot. The queen suggests, seal it again. Ultimately, you settle on the listening room. Simple. True. And already engraved above the glass hearth by some long-forgotten hand. Almost like it was waiting. With the network fully open, things begin to change. Messages sent through whisper flues arrive instantly. The kitchen start piping recipes directly to the butler's pantry via hum-tone codes, the soufflés improve noticeably. The court musicians discover a particular shaft that causes oboes to harmonize with violas 3 rooms away, accidentally creating an avant-garde symphony that leaves one duchess weeping softly into a lemon tart. And best of all? Your own chamber now warms itself evenly. No more right foot frostbite. No more waking to suspicious goat smells. Progress. But even peace brings responsibility. The king has issued a decree. Let every chamber have its steward of silence. Which means you're now in charge. Formally. Of all of it. The draft reports. The whisper registration logs. The corridor pitch charts. Even the flue-based gossip transcriptions, which, for the record, reveal that the pastry chef believes you and Bertrand are secretly married and living in a bread oven. You get a desk. You get a wax seal. You get a goose named Mathilde, who guards the archive hallway. You're unsure why, but she's very territorial. One day, mid-sorting, Pierre drops into your inkwell and flutters a freshly delivered scrap of parchment onto your lap. It reads, "One flue remains unopened. Beneath the old observatory. If it sings, leave it." Bertrand is less than thrilled. That wing was condemned, he mutters, stuffing tools into his satchel. The observatory? After the telescope melted. Long story. The observatory sits on the far edge of the palace. Overgrown, lichen-covered, practically forgotten. You find the flue behind a panel shaped like a constellation map. This one isn't bricked. It's bolted. And unlike the others, it whispers first. Before you even touch it. A low, humming warning. Bertrand kneels. Presses his ear to the stone. He flinches. Don't open it. Why not? It's not just singing, he says. It's remembering. You listen closely. The flue hums, not with notes, but with names. Voices. Generations. The echo of truths not meant to be heard again. You back away slowly. Seal it? Bertrand asks. You shake your head. No. Leave it. You carve a message into the door. In soot ink. Already speaking. Best left alone. And walk away. Some secrets are meant to remain suspended. Not in darkness. Not in silence. But in containment. You can live with that. So can the palace. That evening, the king hosts a final feast in honor of the fully awakened flue system. He insists on seating arrangements based on airflow patterns. The queen ignores him. Pierre receives a miniature laurel wreath and is served roasted pine nuts on a silver button. The toast is short. You stand. Hold your glass. And say. To the breath that binds the stone. To the silence that keeps us honest. To the fire that listens. And everyone, every noble, every page, every steward, every soot scout and secret flue singer, raises their glasses. Even Bertrand. Even the queen. Even Mathilde the goose, who hisses with reluctant respect. As the music plays and laughter rolls through the mirrored halls, you step out onto a balcony, alone, just for a moment. The wind shifts. Gently. And somewhere in the stone beneath your feet, you hear it again. The soft hum. The quiet breath. The palace, still listening. And still at peace. The winter night is soft. Softer than silk, softer than secrets, like a lullaby folded into the folds of the sky. The moon hangs low over Versailles, silvering every column and cornice in quiet approval. The palace glows, not with candles or oil lamps, but from something beneath the stone. Something internal. You. Bertrand. The king. Pierre. All of you changed it. All of you listened. And now, the breath of the palace has returned to rhythm. You walk the corridors one final time before bed. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Each hearth hums a different note, like the palace has become its own gentle orchestra, one that only plays when no one is watching. You pause at the flue behind the Hall of Mirrors. It was always temperamental. Always a little vain. Now, it hums a content C-sharp and reflects a candlelight shimmer that makes your shadow look like it's smiling. You smile back. Because tonight is your last official flue patrol. Tomorrow, the king has promised you rest. You're not sure what that means, but you're too tired to argue. A mainstream historical fact, by the end of Louis XII's reign, the palace had become not just a royal residence but a living statement. Every hall, every window, every absurdly specific corridor reflected the breath of a court learning to balance performance with presence. You've come to understand that Versailles isn't merely big, It's listening. Back in your quarters, your bed has never looked more inviting. You brush soot from your sleeves, place your badge on the nightstand, and untie the string you've worn around your waist since the first expedition. You leave your boots by the fire. You don't need them anymore. The flue in your room sighs once as the embers settle. It almost sounds like it's saying good night. A knock at your door. Bertrand. Holding 2 cups of mulled cider and a paper-wrapped bundle that turns out to be a miniature chimney made of marzipan. I stole it from the pastry tray, he says. You nod, gesture him in, and split it cleanly with a spoon. The marzipan is overly sweet. But perfect. Like everything has been, in the end. Do you think it'll stay balanced, you ask? The flues? No. The people. Bertrand leans back, watches the firelight flicker across the wall. They'll forget, he says after a long pause. They always do. But the stone won't. The breath is in it now. You nod. And the silence that follows is not sad. Just full. Later, the king sends one final message. You find it tucked under your door, scrawled on scroll paper that smells faintly of rosemary and ink. Julian. May your dreams be long, your chimneys clear, and your ceilings properly ventilated. You did well. Let it rest. L. It's signed with a flourish and a tiny gold pigeon. You lie back, pulling the covers to your chin. The wind outside tugs gently at the shutters. Pierre coos from his perch near the window, 1 foot tucked under, wreath askew. The fire dwindles. The air grows still. And the flue breathes. Once. Twice. Then sleeps. Just like you. And now that the flues are quiet, the soot has settled, and the palace breathes steady once more, you can rest too. Let your body grow heavy, the blankets warm around you, like stone warmed by fire. The long corridors of your mind can begin to close their doors for the night. No more echoes. No more whispers. Just breath. In and out. Each inhalation like the rising of a flame, each exhale a drift of harmless smoke up into a flue that remembers every word you've spoken. Every kindness you kept. Every question you asked. You are safe here. The palace is soothed. The drafts are gentle. The secrets have found their place to sleep. You've walked every hall. Climbed every shaft. Listened where others spoke. Spoke where no one dared to listen. And now your work is done. You don't need to keep watch tonight. The breath will carry on without you. The stone will remember your steps. And in the glow of candlelight, far from the bustle of day and the weight of curiosity, you can finally drift. No alarms. No tongs. No pigeons. Just you. Breathing. Soft. Still. Balanced. Let sleep find you now. Let the flue take your dreams like smoke rising through centuries. And when morning comes, let it come slowly. You've earned the quiet. Good night.